Uh,
Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast, the podcast where I, Stewart Alsop III, and my father, Stewart Alsop II, go back into history of the rise of the personal computing industry, the internet, the mobile phone revolutions, and then wrap it all up into how it's affecting AI, and maybe even talk about frontier tech, deep tech, but that will come later. First, we got to figure out where we are now. And today we're going to go dive deep into the Microsoft antitrust case in the late 1990s, where the US Department of Justice charged Microsoft with holding a monopoly in the market for PC operating systems and accused the company of anti-competitive practices. There was also issues of a browser competition between Microsoft's bundling of its Internet Explorer with its operating system and the fight against Netscape. That would be really fun to talk about Netscape. And then there were Senate hearings on March 3rd, 1998, where the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing where several industry leaders, including Bill Gates, testified about competition in this industry. And then that brings in you. What was your involvement in this whole thing?
so let's roll back because there are the issues of the suit, the DOJ against Microsoft. And there's issues that are incredibly similar today with the DOJ versus Apple, which has been accused of monopolizing the Macintosh and the iPhone market. But how I got involved in that, if you go search on the internet, you can see a photo of me sitting at the green table, what they call the green table, in front of this committee of the Senate, the Judiciary Committee. Yeah. And along the table, see if I can remember this correctly, it was Bill Gates on the far left from the Senate's point of view. Then there was, next was Scott McNeely from Sun Microsystems. Then there was Michael Dell, Doug Burgum, and me. Did I miss anybody?
Jim
Oh, yes.
Barksdale.
No, there was Jim Barksdale. And it was really fascinating. The way I say it to people is it was billionaire, 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 me. And the DOJ had asked me to come in and testify as kind of a spoiler, i.e., truly independent point of view. And if you look at that photo behind me, my mother, that's my mother in the plaid jacket, and my then wife, Charlotte James. And so so as I said, the reason that DOJ invited me was to provide a truly independent point of view about the nature of competition, and particularly in this instance. And I had told them in advance that what I would say is that it's not about software. Um, the It's about hardware. And so they contended that Microsoft controlled the operating system, which obviously they did because they created it. And But they had a deal with each of the hardware manufacturers, which essentially did not allow them to adopt a different operating system. And so it wasn't competition between Microsoft and software developers, because all the software developers are going, well, Microsoft has the word processor and they have the spreadsheet and they have all the applications, and they have that because they control the operating system, which is what the DOJ started out thinking that was the problem. But the software developers had lost their status by incompetence, not by Microsoft preventing them from doing anything. But what Microsoft did prevent people from doing was adopting a different operating system. And the most interesting guy on the panel there was Michael Dell, because Dell wanted to get out from under Microsoft's hegemony. And so they started playing with Unix. And Microsoft actually told them privately that if they adopted Unix, that Microsoft would withdraw their license for Windows. And that's like the clearest instance of monopolistic behavior that you can find. You know, you don't do what I tell you to do, then I will screw you. Because that would make it an all or nothing for Dell. It had to stop selling Windows and only sell Unix. Then, you know, they would be in a difficult position. So, so that's why it was interesting that it was Gates, Barksdale, McNeely, because Barksdale, he was the guy running Netscape at the time. And so he was the guy complaining about, oh, they killed my browser, which is software. But small point, yes, it made it much harder for him to compete, but he didn't compete. He didn't compete on features. And then Scott McNeely was kind of irrelevant because he ran Sun Microsystems, which was a Unix shop, and but he didn't have anything to do with the PC industry. So it was a little weird that he was there. And Doug Burgum, it's really fascinating. You go through these people. Doug Burgum then ran a independent software company called Great Plains Software, which 2 years later he sold to Microsoft for several $billions. And he was a friend of Microsoft. He's now the governor of North Dakota and ran for president and spent a lot of his personal money in running for president, money that he got from Microsoft back then. And say, who am I missing here? Michael Dell. Dell was the guy that actually had a beef that was legitimate. He was the only one on the panel. And so I did my testimony. Of course, for me personally, I was so nervous sitting in front of this Senate committee with my mother and my wife in the background that I read my statement, and it
no life,
basically
no life to it.
No life to it. You know, I didn't engage. It was like, and you know, I kind of went, oh well, our independent didn't do very well.
So this is really interesting. There's a lot of places we can go. We can go into the technology, but I this morning I got into a sort of a rabbit hole of how the U.S. government works, and including the executive branch. And you mentioned the judicial branch. I'm also at the same time last night, I was reading before I went to bed about your father, my grandfather, and your uncle, my great uncle, Joe and Stewart. And these guys were not only extremely tied in with FDR's sort of monolith that created the current executive branch, because of all of those different sort of bodies inside the executive branch, I would probably would guess that 80% of it didn't exist before FDR. Well, actually, there's a lot, like the Tennessee Valley Authority. And so what I'm trying to get at is that your father and uncle were the news wing of this rise in the bureaucracy. And then you got wrapped up into the bureaucracy. And I wonder how it felt being inside of the bureaucracy. Why didn't you ever go into politics? Why didn't you ever go into journalism? Did people tell you to do it like our grandfather or my grandfather Stewart Alsop, like follow in his footsteps and such? Why didn't you go into that pathway?
Well, you said were people telling me didn't have any effect on me. I wasn't sitting there listening to somebody tell me what to do. Quite honestly, you have to remember the timing. My father died when I was 22. So, and before I graduated college, because I graduated late, I graduated when I was 24. So, my father died by the time I started looking for jobs. And so there's at one level, right, that my father and uncle were writers. And I was an English major, and I had a maybe genetic affinity for writing, because I can write pretty well. Although interestingly, not the way my father writes, or wrote. But when I was graduating college, I was in LA, and you know, which is kind of a whole different sphere than DC, right? So I was just looking for a job, and I got a job, and it was a cheap job. I worked for something called the Pasadena Guardian, but it gave me enough experience to go, I like this. I like doing this. I want to do this more. In that case, I was like paid $50 a week as a, so I think they called me an associate editor or something like that. But they basically just let me do whatever I want. And I did everything. I did paste up back in the day. I had to actually physically paste up pages and then get them reproduced. I'd take it to the printer. Once it was printed, I'd distribute them to the newsstands around Pasadena. This was a terrible economic thing, and the Guardian went out of business after I left. But it gave me this very first experience, and I liked it. As time went by, of course, I moved to Boston to get married, and your two sisters were born there before we moved to California. But we were there for 8 years, and it was natural, since I already had a job on my resume and only had one, to go look for editorial jobs. And so I got another shitty job at the Small Business Reporter, published in Worcester. And but it confirmed that I liked doing that, and I ended up as the editor. I was the only editor, but I was the editor. And then I got a job at Marine Business, which was published by the same company that did Inc. So it all goes along there. And when I got the job at Inc., I discovered the personal computer business and put Steve Jobs on the cover of my last issue, because they fired me from Inc. too. So if you just look, it's a stair step, right? And by the time I was doing something and people knew who I was, my line was, well, my father did politics and I do technology. And it's an interesting parallel, because I did the politics of technology. I mean, I was tuned up for that.
The politics of technology, interesting. Yeah.
So, Apple and Microsoft and blah, 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 all these companies, there's always, and the role that I played, I'm talking about myself now, which always makes me a little nervous, but the role that I played was I stood in for the consumer in a brand new industry, right? The personal computer industry has no history, right? The history of mainframes and mini computers are completely different.
Yeah.
And the personal computer came along as a personal device, and it was nobody understood what the economics were supposed to be. And indeed, the other thing I did was I got to know the founders of VisiCalc, which had been introduced in 1979 on the Apple II, and it was so valuable to the users that it ended up that VisiCalc was called the tail that wagged the computer dog, and because people started buying Apple IIs to use VisiCalc. So the idea of a spreadsheet, which is not just part of our, I mean, a lot of people don't even use spreadsheets anymore, because it's just become part of the infrastructure, if you will.
Yeah. So, I mean, the spreadsheet went into the database. This is the perfect entry point, because I've been doing the other interviews on Crazy Wisdom, and this Wednesday I interviewed somebody from Yuri, who's building EdgeDB, which is a new database that is going from SQL, that is trying to redo what happened with SQL, because SQL, while a great technology at that time in that transformation from the mini computers to the PC, also has not been updated, because it's such a foundational piece of technology.
Competes with one of our portfolio companies.
Interesting. Interesting. So can you go more into the context of SQL at that time? Was SQL before the VisiCalc? What is the relationship between spreadsheets?
No, it was after VisiCalc. After VisiCalc. So if I remember correctly, the SQL stands for Structured Query Language. I pride myself on knowing what acronyms stand for, because it often tells you what the point of it is.
Yeah.
The structured query languages, it had to go along with something called a relational database. And, you and your uncle and I got into talking about that. So you had to have the structured data before you could do a structured query on the data. And that's part of what your Uncle Joe did, was almost contemporaneous with the personal computer, but happening in a different domain. in order to have data be true, they had to have something called, I know this, I'm amazed I can even talk about it. They had to have something called two-phase commit, right? So you have two computers communicating with each other. In the beginning, it was just a terminal looking inside the computer. But once you had computers talking to each other, you had to, if you changed a piece of data, you had to change it in both places. And that's the two phases. So once you determine that the data is the same in both places, you can do a two-phase commit and change the data, right? Otherwise, you lose the old data and you don't have any history. And so this is my simple-minded way of understanding what your Uncle Joe did. So Progress Software and a bunch of others, wasn't like new, and Oracle innovated around a structured database, relational databases, and the relational means you relate one piece of data to another, and everything is related. Well, in order to query that database, you had to have the structured query language. So SQL and RDBMS, relational database management systems, developed in parallel during the 80s. So this is after the personal computer showed up, but somewhat created because of the personal computer and to some degree the mini computer, because there's this concept of distributed computing, right? In a mainframe, you have one computer sits in the middle, all the terminals look into it. But once you start having computers communicate with each other, either because they're both big computers or because you have little computers talking to the big computers, it gets really complicated. And that was what relational database management systems and structured query language dealt with. Now, all of this, when it started, was really simple. And I don't even want to go to what's happened since then. Blobs and object-oriented databases and all this other stuff, which is still current, but hidden from most people because it's inside the cloud.
That's the hardest thing for me to understand, because I've been teaching these people at AI Whispers how to get AI to code for them. And so I talk about the front end and the back end. In the front end, it's very easy to understand what the front end is because I interact with them all the time. But the back end is just this, it's almost like the unconscious.
I have to tell you this anecdote because when I started, I was an editor at Inc. and I met the guys at VisiCalc, and I'm going like, hey, this is a really interesting business. And I'd ask anybody I knew, I was going, okay, you've got like a computer, right? I could see that. That's a piece of hardware. It's sitting in front of you. And then you got software. And but then I care about all this stuff. You got like development tools and that's software too. And you got like an operating system and that's software too. What's the difference with all this stuff? Every time I ask somebody, I get a slightly different answer based on their involvement and point of view. And so it took me forever to get to the point that I realized, and this was a key understanding, and this took about a year and a half, 2 years. Nobody knew what they were talking about. They all didn't know. Right? They didn't know what the line was. Well, it wasn't very complex at the time. It's actually pretty simple, but no one knew exactly what the line was between the operating system and the application. And remember, networks didn't exist. Computers just talked to themselves. They didn't talk to any other computers. And so and it's only become incredibly complicated because there are so many computers and so many people using computers and doing so many different things. It's like back then it was just like this one thing, and I was having trouble understanding it, and I got that, and then I built up from there, so I can work my way up from the kernel of the operating system all the way up through the network stack, the data stack, all of the stacks, and I kind of keep track of it. I've got that advantage over you because I started from the point of view of the personal.
You saw it all happen. And you were able to go from this complexity step by step and see the complexity as it grew and put it all into place. And here I am now with AI, where it's just like able to now tell me, like in that same way, instead of going to other people, I'm going to the AI to ask them.
The AI, how does this work, AI?
And the AI knows. The AI knows.
It does,
well.
It knows, but doesn't necessarily know how to explain it, and which is really interesting because the nuances. So anyway, I mean, in the process we were talking about, after relational databases, the industry had to figure out how to connect computers. Right.
Mm.
So the first instance
Mm.
of that was Ethernet, which was a physical protocol for connecting computers together. Right. You stuck a thing in one computer and another computer, and then they could talk to each other over Ethernet. And it's a Ethernet is like, if I remember correctly, and I might not, it's systemically a collision avoidance networking protocol.
Uh,
And so yeah, you have to imagine all these little bits are being transmitted over the wire, and you don't want them to run into each other, because then they'd lose them, and you wouldn't have a accurate piece of
mm.
data. So collision avoidance in the protocol was a way of making sure they didn't run into each other and smash each other. It's not correct to say that, but it's good visualization.
So
Anyway, so I mean, these things got stacked
yeah.
up all the way up to the point now where, in the cloud, the cloud can be many things. It can be compute, it can be storage, it can be
Mm.
APIs, it can
Mm.
be software, it can be all of these different things. And Amazon actually is the one that figured this out. You virtualize everything and sell it to people remotely.
So, okay.
AWS.
Oh man, there's a lot of different questions, but the thing you just said, it gives me a great question, which is, now I've got the AI, I'm programming with the AI, and I have to go into all these websites to go get API keys in order to make everything work together. And somebody said, "Oh, go use Amazon's AWS AI text to speech." And I go in and I try to sign in to Amazon, and it was a nightmare. It just a total absolute nightmare. They blocked me. There's all these things. It's all very confusing. The UI is just total crap. And so how is that possible? Why can Amazon, this company, just this giant behemoth of a company, force people to use this shitty software? What about
Well,
the
it's not actually shitty. And that's the thing. You're interpreting it shitty because you're personally having a hard time with it. But it's built for developers, for programmers. And they know what to do, no problem. And
but
because
only
you're
because
using AI to do your programming, you haven't learned all the underlying stuff.
I don't know. Because there are other examples, particularly in the newer versions of software, something like Vercel, something like and I did go get an API from the text to speech thing. Like it's programmers designing the UI. That's where I think the complexity is, because yes, they
Oh,
know how to use it, and they know how to organize it, but I talk, the developers are all agree with me on this AWS point. Like they all think it's just a nightmare working with this thing. And so there's something about I think we've talked about this too, which is that the programmers develop UI based on how they think the world operates. And so it ends up
yeah,
being,
we call it the God syndrome. If you're a programmer, you control the environment, right? And you can do anything you want in that environment. So is it more important to do that the way the
yeah,
programmer
yeah,
thinks it should be
interesting.
done,
Yeah.
or the way that the customers can handle it? They're here. This is a really high level observation, but absolutely true. Um, Microsoft started with BASIC,
Mm,
and their customers were programmers programming
mm,
in BASIC.
mm, mm,
They have a lot more languages now, and they have a lot of other products and all of that stuff. But the soul of Microsoft is still the programmer.
mm,
And this is a
mm.
hard program. They do C, C++. They have all
Yeah,
different kinds of languages,
yeah.
but their customer base, the one that sits in the head of, I think even now with Satya Nadella, are programmers. Although they've switched from kind of programmers who make programs for personal computers to programmers who make programs inside companies.
Yeah, interesting.
Is kind of their core. They've never been able to figure out how to do good UI
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they're developing software for programmers. The company has to decide who their customers are. No matter how big they are, they still have to decide who their customers are. Actually, Amazon's a really interesting phenomenon. I'll get to that. So Apple always serves people who use computers, consumers,
Yeah.
um, and which was great when they were the only computer that had a spreadsheet, right? Because people started buying them in businesses, but Apple didn't care about businesses, so they went like, whatever, oh, IBM PC, here, you take all the spreadsheet people. That's not what we do. And when the Mac came out, their core, very core, are graphic designers and sort of power users of
Yeah,
graphical.
interesting.
So anyway, you follow the thread on any company. Over time, they have to redefine themselves the way the customers define themselves, their customers, the core customers. And Amazon is a really interesting phenomenon because AWS, even though it came out of Amazon as a retailer, has a different set of customers, and they serve both sets of customers really well. The consumers who buy stuff through their retail operations and the corporate programmers. And they started, AWS started with entrepreneurs, with startups. That was a very cheap way to do storage online and compute and the other services they do. But that's built up, and they figured out how to serve corporate customers. Even to the point that they have cloud services for the CIA. Not many people know that.
Which
is create
is
their own instance,
which is different. So because that's traditionally Microsoft's customer.
Yeah, and so in that domain, AWS took everybody by surprise. How fast it grew and how profitable it was. Probably even took Amazon by surprise. But when they started it, they made AWS a service that even the retail part of Amazon had to buy. They created a separation. They basically created a separate company. And it was very cheap compared to building your own servers and data centers and stuff like that. It was a much cheaper way to do it. And they'd figured out, because in a retail business, you don't want to spend a lot of money on technology, but they'd scaled so much that they could just spin AWS out as a separate company that provided services to the mothership. And it's now actually more profitable than the mothership. So in that domain, Microsoft got there first. And was there with
took over.
Azure and their cloud services. Although they had to go through a transition, because it used to be that all their applications, their enterprise applications, were on physical Microsoft servers. They had to virtualize it and to catch up with AWS. And Google really wants to be in that business and is always number 3. And once you're number 3, it's really hard to
change that.
Change the rank order.
So this is a perfect entry point into the question that keeps on coming back to my mind as we're talking, which is that Alsop Louis, the firm that you guys built, I believe it was 2002 to when did you guys start? 2006. You've described it as a sort of a frontier, deep tech, other type of thing. And that it goes back to when you talked about Microsoft, or sorry, when the DOJ brought you in to talk about it, you said hardware. And there's this hardware versus software distinction. And a lot of the things that you've invested in are the hard tech inside of software. So, and then this strange thing happened in 2006. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. In 2006, something happened, which was social media. And social media was this thing that I think very few people, even these futurists who would write these beautiful cyberpunk novels, who would really accurately describe the world that we're currently in, missed it. They all missed this social media thing. It's very strange, very abstract, very like this idea of networks, of social relationships was unintuitive to a lot of people within this PC industry. And what were you thinking as all of that happened? I want to get into the deep tech and the hard tech and the frontier tech, because it feels like for me, 2006 to 2024 is sort of like a veering off, where we, as a society, we sort of veered off into this strange abstract world where we kind of created these fantasy palaces, and social media kind of creates that. And now we're coming back to the real world, the physical world, and these things are going to get crazier and crazier. But at the same time, we need to be connected to the physical world. I just threw a lot at you, but what?
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here looking up. Twitter was introduced in 2006. Instagram was after that. Facebook was before that. And these were all the social media, WhatsApp, all the stuff that now in retrospect, Facebook did this amazing thing of buying most of it. So now it's all part of Facebook or Meta. And so sort of 2005, and we got a piece of it, right? We did Twitch, and Twitch is considered social media. And we made a lot of money off that when Amazon bought it. And so we were in the social media thing. But what happened with social media was that there was a period of time, sort of 2005 to 2015, say 10 years, where the easiest business to start was social media. Remember, Instagram started, they had like 5 employees, and Facebook paid over $1 billion. Maybe
and
2 billion, I can't remember.
WhatsApp was the same thing.
And WhatsApp, So, and Twitter, it's got a screwed up history because there was never a real founder. They had 3 founders. None of them actually had founded the thing. It was so they never had a corporate culture where they knew how to perform because they didn't know actually what business they were in. And then, maybe now Elon Musk has figured it out because it's this crazy ass thing. And he's crazy ass, and that kind of fits together. The social media now has completely changed, right? There's no novelty to it anymore. It's baked into the infrastructure. Congress is investigating how it's screwed up young girls and, all this stuff. It's just there now. And you can't really start something new in social media. It's very interesting because I'm getting pitched on new social media ideas. And it's like, guys, don't go after something that's already been around for 15 years. So that period of time between 2005 and 2015 includes like the 2008 real estate financial crisis.
Which also changed the network.
And so it became, for the venture capital community, the fastest way to make money, right? All you had to do is write some software, and suddenly like have billions of users or hundreds of millions, and then you could either sell it or go public, and so from the VC community, they got really wrapped up in that social media phenomena, and we always, so this is about us. Our firm actually started mostly with cybersecurity software, because Gillen came out of Incutel and he had a real understanding of that, and it was not a popular thing to invest in when we started. It became popular, and we got out of it as soon as the big boys got in because they wrote much bigger checks than we did. And then we kind of went deeper and deeper into hard tech. But during that period of time, just the teens, right, 2010 to 2020, it was all about software. And AWS, a lot of this other stuff had a lot to do with it too. There was a lot of companies that started in database management and online stuff, and from the VC's point of view, it was like a drug. It's like, oh my God, yeah, shoot me up, give me something I can turn around in 5 years and make a 200x on. I don't want to do that deep tech stuff. That takes forever, and you have to know what you're talking about. So we went into deep tech, which is actually our problem right now. No, I'm talking about this publicly, but we have incredible companies in our portfolio, but they're still private, and we haven't gotten any liquidity, right? So
that's an interesting question. Okay, so why are companies? Because it's not only the companies that you're investing in, it's not only deep tech or hard tech, but it's all like, why are companies all remaining private? Why is that? There's like in 2024. I think the IPO market has completely
shut down now because for a variety of reasons. But there's always this cycle. There has been this cycle. Now, the process of going public has been messed with. And back in the 1980s and 1990s, you go public with like 20 million in revenue, and you could go public and be worth a couple $100 million, and that'd be a great win. And then you could be a public company and use that to raise more money if you needed or to grow yourself. That was a kind of thing. And there were investment banks called boutique banks who facilitated that and lived off that process. Everything has consolidated since, at least in the financial business. So, you have JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and so forth. These banks are huge, right? Their investment bank operation is a little piece of it. It's sort of prestigious, but it's not what drives the business anymore. So there's no built-in system for bringing companies public anymore. Plus, there is a secondary market now where you can buy and sell stock in private companies. And so you can last longer. You can keep raising money, particularly because the venture capitalists are now bigger and they'll write bigger checks. You can just last longer without going public. There's no compulsion to go public. So that's that part of the business, the financial part of the business that manages, the process of going public. Just as a side note, OpenAI is raising $6.5 billion, the biggest venture capital round in the history of mankind.
As a private company.
As a private company.
Interesting.
And they'll be valued at $150 billion. But this was unheard of previously. It wasn't even possible to make it happen. But then the industry itself has changed, the computing business. And the thing that most people don't understand is the computer industry used to be an industry. It's kind of like the oil business, or it was a business that operated on its own dynamics. And now the computer business is everything. Partially because of the cloud, partially because of, it's spread out, and everybody has mobile phones, and there are billions, out of I don't think we've reached 8 billion yet, but somewhere between 7.5 billion people in the world. Like half of them have cell phones. Some of them are just still flip phones, but a third of them have smartphones. And so anything you want to do goes through a computing system, right? And this is one of the issues people get exercised about. We use computers too much. We use our phones too much. We're all addicts and slaves to our phones. And but you can't live life without a phone, at least in an advanced society. And so even if you're in a not advanced society, not having a phone is the major issue. It's no longer, do you have enough cows or, cash? So the whole world has changed now, and now the computing industry is considered a utility. It's part of the fabric of life. And so you combine all the changes, and this is what you end up with. Companies don't go public at $200 million valuation. That's like stupid. There's this whole thing that happened with SPACs, which, now just all the companies who went SPAC, with like 5 exceptions, are just in deep trouble. And
so I've heard of SPACs a bunch, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners probably already know what a SPAC is, but actually I've never looked into it because I was just off in the
specialized purchase acquisition. God damn,
I'll find it.
I can't remember.
I'll find it.
Yeah, find what SPAC stands for, but
Special purpose acquisition
company. Yeah, there we go. Like almost as fast as the internet. Still, doing what I said earlier, that I like to know every acronym. Someday ask me about PCMCIA. SPACs are a way to essentially bypass the normal IPO thing. You'd go sell stock to the public and then buy a company, rather than have a company that you want to sell stock to the public for. And everybody thought this would be great. There'd be a faster way to go public, and blah, blah, blah. And it turned out that the IPO process, as it is instantiated, is actually a really good process.
So what is the IPO process then?
Well, first of all, you have to have an operating company. You have to have a company that can show results, right? Whatever they are. Something that used to be, you could sell stock in an IPO, and a company that's still losing money. That's kind of stopped. And so you have to have results, and then you have to do your accounting. You have to nail everything down, and the Securities and Exchange Commission regulates that and makes sure that that's actually what you do. In the SPAC process, you didn't have to go to the SEC, and so, well, you did, but it was a different process, and it basically, in an IPO, when you offer stock to the public, it's a legitimate offer, right? So there's no scamming going on, and it's happened from time to time, but generally speaking, it's supposed to, make it a safe. But safe and this is where it gets really confusing, because particularly when you go back to the 3 branches of government, but what's safe mean? right?
Yeah.
It means that what the company's saying is true.
Yeah. Okay.
Not
Not
that
that
it's a good investment, right? The government's job is not to guarantee you don't lose money, although they seem to think that might be their
Now
job
that's
now.
changing. Interesting.
So.
Yeah. Okay. So an IPO, this is okay, let's go back to the politics then. So we've got three branches of government. We've got IPOs, which the SEC regulates. The SEC actually found it out. So I found this blob of the executive branch of all the different departments, including the Human Health Services, the Homeland Security, all Office of Executive Management, Budget and Management, all these things within the executive branch. And then there's this one little sideline that goes straight down and it says independent agencies. And inside the independent agencies, there's the CIA, the FBI, but not only that, 150 more, one of which is the SEC.
So I'll have to look up the Chevron.
Yeah, the ruling, the recent ruling, right?
Chevron ruling, yeah.
Yeah.
Because this concept of an independent executive agency tests the boundaries of the three branches of government.
Yeah, interesting.
And the original idea, and I don't know if you ever saw Hamilton, but this is what made that play so interesting, because Alexander Hamilton wrote the rules. And so the fundamental rule is there are checks and balances that every branch of government had something that kept it from acting independently. And the primary checks and balances are between the executive and congressional branches.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court's kind of the thing that sits up here and makes sure that the rules are being played by fair, which is an issue right now because Trump packed the bench. And they're changing the way that the rules are being played. And the Chevron is a really interesting one because they basically say that if a executive branch agency is too independent, they're actually writing laws, which is the job of Congress.
Yeah, interesting.
So, and it was a convenience thing. As the government got bigger, they had these independent agencies so that Congress didn't have to deal with all of the goddamn details of running the government, which was easier when it was smaller. And now it's like this massive thing. And so the Supreme Court curtailed the ability of independent agencies to act. This has got to roll through the whole system now, so we don't really know where it'll end up. But they took it to the test case was, whether the maritime agency, I can't remember what it's called, could tell fishermen how much fish they could catch. So nice thing to do, right? To avoid catching all the fish and killing them all.
Yeah.
But not consistent with independent with the relationship between Congress and the executive branch. So the key agencies that are independent are the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, the Federal Reserve Bank is an independent agency, right? And so there's a tradition around those, but Trump and his cohort are trying to redefine all that. And if you really want to get into it, read about Project 2025.
Okay. So, I want to drill into there's Alexander Hamilton, which is an interesting thing, but I think I have to go back and read a lot of that. It almost feels like we're so we'll go all the way back to the Roman Empire. Roman Empire was a republic, and then with Caesar, it switched to an empire. And then that empire switched into two empires. And then with the Byzantine Empire, in the 500 ADs, you had Justinian come in and sort of reformulate the way that the Byzantine, and this is where all the Byzantine, like the word Byzantine itself becomes Byzantine, because it's just this complex thing that nobody understands. It feels like the US, where we are right now, like somebody like your dad, my grandfather, could go in and make sense of all this. And now it feels like nobody can make sense of it. One single person can't really make sense of it.
Should listen to Ezra Klein. Listen to Ezra Klein's podcast. He can make sense of it. People can make sense of it. The problem is that the distribution systems have all changed, right? My father and uncle wrote a column and that was syndicated to over 200 newspapers, I believe.
Yeah.
And back in the day, in the late 40s and 50s, that was it right there. That was the most distribution you could get. So more people read my uncle and father's column than anything else.
Yeah.
So they were the celebrities of their day. Then television happened, and that changed, right? And then the
Interesting.
internet happened. I mean, it's like it's this continuously moving thing. Because the internet is so democratic,
Yeah, decentralized.
anybody can say anything, and how you figure out which one you want to listen to is now a whole different thing, right? It's not just
Yeah,
one place you can go. Like,
that's the
yeah,
point. Yeah, it's the decentralized. We're all going back into tribes. There is no nation anymore. Like there's no national consciousness.
well, you don't want to go too far in one way or the other, right? We're still Americans, right? We come from, and the American the Constitution was considered a grand experiment, right? Oh, can you do this in a country? Can you have a
Yeah,
country
yeah,
where one
yeah,
person can't possibly run the whole thing
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's just not possible. And Trump's kind of pushing this, but um, that's why I say read about Project 2025, because they want to change the fundamental principles in the checks and balances. It's a scary prospect, and Trump has disavowed it and said, "Oh, no, those are the crazy people," which is really weird to hear Trump say. The So it has been, and for whatever it is, 200 and I can't remember, say 1776 to 1976 plus whatever that is, 250 years. We've been run along doing this grand experiment, and that's why we had a border problem, because all these people want to come to the U.S. because we have these basic principles, and which do not exist. Even, and you mentioned the Roman Empire. You can talk about the French. Bonaparte took over most of Europe, and because he was a dictator, and then they kind of tossed him out, put him in prison. And there's this whole back and forth between highly centralized and highly distributed systems in governance and human governance. And so everything has been tried, at least as far as anybody knows right now. We've tried everything as a race about how to manage. And we even got to the point of United Nations where there was at least this little picture that maybe we could all become one
Global.
civilization. Yeah. Which it has not worked out very well. But and maybe we'll get there at some point. But where are you? Someone cited a book to me called The History of Yesterday.
Oh, that's a great title.
Yeah. It's a great title. And I can sit there going, well, I got so damn many books to read.
Yeah, no, me too. It's like,
but The History of Yesterday is the fundamental ideas. Wherever you are at one point, you're trying to define where you are relative to yesterday. And you do this as individuals and as races. And
is it the invention of yesterday? States. The invention of yesterday.
Oh, the invention of yesterday. The invention of yesterday. Thanks. Yep. So, this is the difficulty, knowing where you are in the whole context. I appreciate going back and trying to figure out, the Roman Empire, because it's like, that's one reference point. But, just a couple thousand years earlier, we were talking about, a little longer than that. But, we started with caveman. Yeah. We've been through a lot of different phases. Now we're 7.5 billion people trying to coexist.
Well, and this goes back to the media thing. And now I have some questions about Stewart Alsop 1. We just start referring to essay 1. Stewart Alsop 1 didn't make the jump from, well, there were some TV interviews of him, but neither him nor Joe made the jump to the television. And that's what, but
no, the guy who did it was Walter Cronkite. He was the iconic the TV news broadcaster. And he interviewed your grandfather at one point. But so no, they made the jump, but they were not television people, right? They didn't join that. Yeah. But they were still very influential.
Kennedy was the first politician that did win because of television.
His competition was Richard Nixon. Who came back, right, and ended up as president, but that was who Kennedy defeated in 1960. And but Kennedy was considered telegenic, right? He's the Kennedy clan, and his hair
Yeah,
looked good, and
yeah,
he's
yeah,
kind of like Gavin Newsom now,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But the big deal with Kennedy was actually that he was Catholic.
yeah,
A lot of people said there's no way a Catholic can be president of this country. I can compare that now to Kamala Harris. You got a person of color,
yeah,
POC, whatever the hell you want to call her, Black, South Asian, woman is, and the competition is either we get that crazy guy again or we get somebody new. And then, this is, I do this. I go like, Kamala's going to win by 7 points. Um, in which case there's no issue about the electoral college. It's like if you win by that margin, you get the electoral college. And Biden won by 4.5 points. So it's not a huge stretch to say that she might win by a bigger margin.
Okay, and I want to go. So FDR with the radio, he wasn't telegenic, but he was radiogenic.
Yeah, yeah, good word. Yeah,
Yeah,
the whole fireside chat. His voice, the way that he talked to the population every week, during the war, he would have a fireside chat, and people would be glued to their radios to listen to that. They
yeah.
loved FDR. And I remember that FDR also served 3+ terms as president, which there's never anyone has ever served more than 2 terms. Like, that's been an inviolate rule, so to speak. But his third term started during World War II, and he made the case that they should keep the same president for this huge thing that was going on.
Okay, can we wrap this up with the last 5 minutes into AI? Because I got this hint of like, so the whole time we've been talking about the rise of modernity, the expansion of the federal government, the new technologies coming in and changing things. And it just feels like the whole thing is collapsing. Like not many people watch CNN anymore. We're not talking about the distribution that you mentioned with my grandfather, where he was like, everybody was listening to him. There is no everybody is listening to this person anymore. We're all in these fractured environments.
Yeah.
AI is going to come in and generate our environments for us. That seems really clear to me now, that AI is going to generate environments. There's going to be some influence of human beings into how that generates, but that seems really weird. Like, that seems like we're going to live in generated political landscapes, where it's this symbiosis between a human and an AI generation. Last 5 minutes, do you agree? Do you disagree? What's your take on where we're entering now?
Well, everything you're talking about is being talked about. So this is the issue. Do you believe or not believe? And do you believe that AI is going to become sort of the predominant cultural influence? Or do you believe that humans will stay in charge? And so you can either be there's this word, the accelerationist, or you can be um, basically a negative.
What aren't there third ways? I was just talking with my friend about this. Nick Land. Nick Land is the original accelerationist. He's the philosopher that created the accelerationist movement, basically, or the accelerationists made it off of him, basically. And my friend was explaining it all very clearly. And Nick Land's whole take, he went and read Marx, and he talks about capital. So we have cybernetics. Cybernetics is a philosophy that started in the 1940s and 1950s, really got popular in the 1960s. It was all about negative feedback. So I have my goal, I try to hit that goal, and then I get feedback when I, veer off that goal. I get feedback. Okay, go back to the goal. Go back to the goal. Nick Land's accelerationism says that capital is after exponential gains. So it's positive feedback. You're going towards something, and then all of a sudden you get a bunch of feedback saying you're going the right way exponentially. And with like something that humans can't really think about, like exponential. And so he says that that's the accelerationist thing. We just need to accelerate this thing so quickly. But in that process, do we lose our humanity? So is there a third way where it's like
part of the theory, at least as I understand it, is that you accelerate as fast as you can because you believe it will enhance humanity and make it a better world.
But if capital has this sort of autonomous agency outside of human-led goals, then they would say, in the same way that capitalism arose, and then Marx's critique of capitalism, saying that, you know, humans have lost out in this process because we're all these peons that live in this giant thing that's after train on capital.
You're above my pay grade. And because I think it boils down to pretty simple stuff, right? If you believe that humanity is just in the process of destroying itself, and a lot of people believe that, you know, which also started with nuclear power, even though most people that are well informed believe that nuclear power is the key to being able to get off of oil. You know, it's at a level that nobody can be definitive one way or another. We can all argue about it, but it's inherent in an individual's point of view. Either you believe it's going to be good or not, we're frequently wrong. We collectively are frequently wrong, and nuclear power is an excellent example. I'm sure you read the news recently that they're going to restart 3 Mile Island to send all this stuff to Microsoft so they can run their LLMs. If you, and I think the key word is agency. If computer systems, as is shown in Terminator, if the computer systems take over and go to war with each other, we don't have no agency. We're not there anymore. We're just running around like little rats trying to escape the war. And of course, the ultimate agency would go back in time and change history. But so I believe that we will always have agency. We always have the choice to make, and humans don't always make the right choice, right? But I believe it's a pendulum swing, and we're in what looks like a really scary movement of the pendulum right now. But at some point, it's going to hit this, and it's going to bounce back. And so I actually tend to think that we will have a kind of utopian world, probably in 150 years, so well after both of us have passed on. But there is still the potential for where AI is
doing all the stuff we don't want to do.
I mean, our agent, and but we still control it and have agency. And but you know, you go. I'd say Ezra Klein, because he's asked these really interesting questions. He said, you know, I used to grow up watching the Jetsons. So I went back and tried to figure out, and this is an episode that he did. I went back and tried to figure out how old would George Jetson be now? That's right, because the TV series was back in the 60s, I think, maybe even 50s, and it's an animated thing. And he said, well, George would be right at retirement age right now. So you sit there and you go look at the Jetsons and go, we were imagining that in the span of 50 years, we would have this highly automated system where we'd all have, you know, happy lives, you know, still go to work and still have a family and do all this stuff. So it's like, whatever you believe at one point in time, you know, it's going to be different, and you really don't know what's going to happen. But I tend to be an optimist, and believe in the sort of fundamental value of human agency.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a cool place to end. That was fun. We'll do another one soon. I'm going to send this to my friend who we just had this conversation of Nick Land and all this, everything. So thank you so much.